Let the WCW fun continue. I'm John Rethnam with every WCW pay-per-view main event ranked from worst to best, part 5. 46 more matches out of this list of 113 pay-per-view main events to talk about. Yeah, I'm going to probably end up having to go to a part 7 here because I get very praiseworthy from here on. Though there are going to be a few rants mixed in on this, and it's going to get really praiseworthy as we get to the top. Because what the fuck is the point of ranting about the good matches? You gotta rant about the bad matches like I did in the previous entry. So please check those videos out if you haven't already. And thank you guys very much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it, not just on this list, but all the content on the channel. It means a whole lot that you like what I have to say. I'm just a crazy wrestling fan sharing my love of wrestling. So let's jump right on into it with number 46, Sting and the Giant versus Hall and Nash. For the WCW tag titles is Slamboree 98. Okay, by this point, they had effectively killed off any momentum that Sting had going into Starrcade 97. They did the bullshit finish, the non-fast count. He won the title still and then lost it to Hogan on the next Nitro. They held up the title until Super Brawl 8. Sting won it, had a shit reign, lost it to Savage. Hogan beat him for that. And now Sting is competing for the tag titles, and he wins them with the Giant. And then they do the thing where the Wolfpack gets formed, and yeah, they pop for Sting joining the Wolfpack after he had fought against the NWO, but then the NWO fractured because they had about 18 football teams worth of people. Seriously, I think even Doug Dillinger was a member of the NWO at one point, and they decided to do this. But this was before that. They decided to have Sting and the Giant win the tag team championships, which was nice. And then they had the Giant go back into the black and white NWO, so you had a member of the NWO black and white as a tag team champion, and then Sting, who would be then a member of the Wolfpack as a tag team champion. They would have to compete in a match later on another pay-per-view to decide who would win control of the tag team championships. You think WCW is just stumbling a little bit at this point with their booking? Quite a bit, in fact. And not that WWE wasn't doing some bullshit. They would do the Brawl for All in the summer of 98, and thankfully, would not have it happen at SummerSlam. We got Taker versus Austin and some other good shit. Unfortunately, in WCW, we were getting just butchered stuff with the tag team titles, with Sting, who was the hottest guy they had for a while, and they fucking killed it off. And then, we get to the match that I just referred to, number 45, Giant versus Sting, control the tag titles. Yeah, it was a tag team champion versus tag team champion main event. Now, that being said, it actually wasn't that bad. They took it seriously. Giant getting slammed by Sting was a pretty big deal. This was a little bit better than the previous tag match, which was well worked, by the way. I should say that. This was also well worked. It was, just around the same pace as their match at Great American Bash 96. No, wait, that was Slamboree 96, and then it was Great American Bash 96 for Luger and the Giant. But this was well worked. And Sting, while the whole Wolfpack thing, it had a cool theme, but it was fucking bullshit. It was bullshit to, keep the NWO going into 98, even though the shirts were selling hot. They just milked it for all it was worth and got to the point where it was all watered down and everything. And now we have it in New Japan and AEW. Wait, that's the Bullet Club. I'm sorry. They seem alike because the Bullet Club is just a watered down bullshit version of the NWO. And not even the good NWO now. Despite the great talent, they need to end that. This, however, at least for the tag team championships, it made it feel important. But then I think, let's see. If I'm right, Sting would name Nash his tag partner soon after, and then Hall and the Giant would win the tag titles back, thus proving that the tag titles didn't mean anything. It was just fucking ridiculous. So then we get to number 44, Battle Bowl 92, the Battle Bowl Battle Royal, Starrcade 1992. Had it been Vader versus Sting in the main event, I actually probably would have ranked that in the top 10 because that's one of my favorite matches in WCW history. Great Muta, despite losing previously in the evening, ended up winning the whole damn thing. They at least went down to one ring. They didn't do 2 rings like they did in 91, thank fuck. And it was, more centrally focused on just a few talents. Great Muta winning was fine. I mean, in fact, I would even call it pretty damn good because it showed what they should have been doing with Muta had they not botched him, having him lose a whole bunch of times at Starrcade 89. And they wanted to turn Muta babyface, and Muta would have been a great babyface in 1990. Early 90, and then I guess apparently Gary Hart didn't like that and thought that he would, be effectively kicked out of the company. But maybe Muta wanted to go back home to Japan. Whole point is, Battle Bowl 92, it's Starrcade 92. Starrcade 92, by the way, one of my favorite Starrcades. Really goddamn good. up and down the card, even though I know there are some people that didn't like some of the matches. I did, but we all have different opinions. This is pretty good stuff, and at least the One Ring Battle Royal actually helped. It helped focus on people rather than being spread too thin. At least WCW never went to 3 rings and 60 men. Why would they do that? A kid, they did, and it wasn't very good. Despite being fun, it wasn't very good. Number 43, Vader versus Bulldog WCW title, Slamboree 93. So they did a DQ finisher. Vader's reign, if you look back on it, when he, won it, I think in like early 93 or something like that. Won it back from Ron Simmons. It was late 92, early 93. He had a pretty good run. Actually, I think Sting may have even beat him in Japan. They may have never recognized that, but he had a pretty good run. He had a really good, match with Sting, the White Castle Fear strap match. Talk about that later in the review or in the countdown. And he would have good feuds, but the problem is Bulldog and Vader they didn't have the chemistry I think that they wanted, that the company wanted them to have. That being said, it was a really good power battle because Bulldog at this point, when Bulldog was motivated, was really goddamn good, and Vader was a beast at this point. Injuries hadn't caught up with him. Vince McMahon's shit booking. Shawn Michaels hadn't gotten to Vader. Yeah, I'm still upset about what Shawn Michaels did to Vader because he was a fucking prick, at least back then. But this was when Vader was at his peak, and WCW pay-per-views were starting to mean a little bit more. 93 had some pretty good pay-per-views, and then things would really start to turn the corner in mid-94 when Hogan got signed. And at least Vader was a credible champion. Sure, it was a dodgy finish, but it was to continue the feud for a bit, even though Bulldog was clearly never going to win the championship. But good stuff, at least as far as a big man battle. Number 42, the Giant versus Luger WCW title Great American Match 1996. I referred to Slamboree 96 a bit ago when I ranted a bit about the tag team championships and Sting and Luger and all that. And now we come to something that was pretty damn good. Giant had an underappreciated WCW championship run from like mid to late April of 96 till, early August of 96. He had some pretty damn good matches, was really delivering, he was delivering some good promos overall, but Jimmy Hart was mostly speaking for him. Giant was coming into his own and doing some pretty good stuff, and this was a pretty damn good match from Luger. You know me, I'm not fond of giving credit to Luger, yet I'm going to have to later in the countdown because for a period of years, especially in the late 80s, early 90s, he had some damn good matches. This, however, was pretty good in the fact that Luger has back worked on, I think he got chokeslammed through a table on a Nitro just before this pay-per-view, so the question was his back in good shape? And he was able to counteract him, but then he couldn't, and then Giant would end up winning him, winning him. He'd win his services. Win the services of the total package. Gross. Anyway, the big total package show. I'm moving on from this. This was a pretty good match, though, and one of the better ways to feature Lex Luger, where he didn't look weak. It just looked like it took everything, a diminished Luger to be beaten by the Giant, but barely. Kept Luger strong, somewhat at least. And then we get to number 41, Flair versus Nikita NWA title, Starrcade 1986. Boy, Magnum TA's injury was ill-timed, wasn't it? Not that there's ever a really good timed injury that is. It's very unfortunate. Nikita had to be switched babyface. Him and Magnum TA had feud over the U.S. Championship. And the idea was Nikita turned babyface to honor Magnum. Basically, like he earned his respect and stuff like that. Now, people took to a face Nikita pretty quickly. I mean, you could take a look back at, the TV and stuff like that. He was a hated villain and really good at it. Nikita Koloff, very underappreciated. One of the best U.S. champions in WCW history. I would argue even in if you factor WCW, WWE runs with the U.S. Championship, I would say Nikita measures up there. He did some really, really good shit with it. Now, they had to switch him babyface, and this match was good. Flair could get a lot out of Nikita, but Nikita had only been in the business for a few years. And he wasn't, only a couple actually, I think. And he got a lot out of him, but it wasn't what it would have been had it been Magnum. That's no fault against Nikita. That's no fault against Flair. That's just what it was supposed to be. And overall, didn't end up working. At least as well as they planned. Now, there were times where it did. And they did, a fluky finish because they had to. They didn't want to beat either guy. They definitely didn't want to switch the NWA title. They kind of were stuck. Starrcade 86 was a damn good pay-per-view. But it did have this where you're like, okay, there were some potholes. and they were going to, lead to rematches and stuff like that. But Nikita was obviously never going to win the NWA title. It was what it was, and it certainly wasn't bad. Not as great as it could have been, but it wasn't bad. Number 40, Savage vs. Flair, WCW title, Starrcade 95. I recently retro-reviewed Starrcade 95. You can check that out if you want. During the time where I was retro-reviewing all the Nitros, from the beginning to the end of 95, and I decided to stop doing the ones in 96 because I was retro-reviewing way too much stuff, and I decided to do lists like this and expand on rants and stuff like that, and I'll be doing more ranking lists like this. Here's a few, just so you know, a little sidebar. Every Ultimate Warrior WWE WCW pay-per-view match ranked from worst to best. Every Randy Savage WWE and WCW pay-per-view match ranked from worst to best. And then the same for the Steiners. I don't know if I'm going to include anything from Impact for the Steiners, even though it wasn't, their little brief run wasn't bad. I'm probably just going to focus on that. But the whole point is, I had to ease back and I decided to make Starrcade 95 pretty much the last, 95 show that I would review. And I'll tell you this, it was a good show to go out on, and this was what it was. Flair, Sting, and Luger were in a triangle match, and both of them got counted out, so Flair won, and Flair had been going after Savage for a while, wanting to get at Savage and beat him, and he did. I do say, though, this wasn't as good as it could have been. Not as good as their other matches that they had earlier in the year. And definitely had a big fight feel to it, but it also was filled with shenanigans and filled with silliness and had its moments, had some good stuff. Flair did win, and he would hold the championship until losing it to the Giant on that Nitro in April of 96. At least it was a good main event, but the shenanigans kind of brought it down a few spots. And then we get the Hogan versus Vader Steel Cage WCW title match, Bash at the Beach, 1995. Okay, quick edit here. Well, not necessarily an edit, but a correction on my part. I said that the Super Brawl 5 match was a cage match. It was not. I would like to apologize. I don't remember the user's name exactly, but if you comment on this video, I will recognize it because I can't recall names right now. I'm really bad with names. I'm sorry. Thank you for correcting me on that. While the match was still pretty good for what it was, I did mess up, and I owe to my mistakes, that is. Hogan versus Vader, Bash at the Beach. It was good. It was just unfortunate this was Vader's last WCW pay-per-view appearance, because then the incident with Orndorff and he would be fired, and not be part of Fall Brawl 95. To be fair, I don't think Vader would have survived much longer in WCW and probably would have left anyway. But this was a good match for what it was. Now, Vader at least got more shots in on Hogan. It wasn't the best steel cage match, though, because, nobody can get in. Except people totally could. I think the wind was blowing the goddamn cage over. I mean, they had to have people out there holding the damn thing up. Because it was Bash at the Beach, actually on the beach. They put a pay-per-view on the beach, and then they wondered why it didn't fucking work at all. That being said, though, Hogan and Vader, they had a good feud. It just never seemed like Vader was able to get his, comeuppance. Or not get his comeuppance, but he could never get an advantage over Hogan. Hogan would always beat Vader and beat him in the powder. And he probably liked working with him because he was a big man. He could get sympathy, but it just always felt like Vader could have gotten a little bit more out of the feud. That being said, it's pretty much the best match they had. That's not saying a ton, but it's still, probably the best match they had on pay-per-view, at least in my opinion. Yeah, Hogan putting the whole Mastodon, steam helmet thing on and kind of, effectively destroying Vader there was a bit ridiculous, and Vader did suffer a shoulder injury when he, I believe, tried to do an elbow drop off the goddamn top. That was a bit rough. But at least it had its moments. And the sad thing is, it was actually probably the best thing on the Bash at the Beach 95 card, which wasn't a very good pay-per-view. We then get to number 38, that is. Sorry, Sting and Bulldog versus Vader and Sid, the Masters of the Powerbomb. Beach Blast 1993, the second and last Beach Blast event. At least this had some star power to it. You had Sid and Sting that were going to have, that were going to keep feuding. Vader and Bulldog, and then eventually the rumor was it was going to be Vader and Sid, but then Arn and Sid decided to violently scissor each other, literally, with actual goddamn scissors. Very violent, very destructive, and Sid ended up getting fired from the company. Now, with this match, what I liked about it is that it was Sting and, Bulldog before the Allied powers were around in WWE when it was Bulldog and Luger. That was a great idea. No, it wasn't. But at least it gave Bulldog something to do, babysitting Lex Luger, who had failed miserably as a main eventer. Sid and Vader were doing some good stuff as well, and at least it had good star power to it. It was a well-worked tag match. The crowd loved Sting, as you would expect, and they never tried to turn Sting heel like 6 years later, except they totally fucking did. It was fucking stupid. This was a good match, though, and a good representation of how the in-ring product in WCW was really goddamn good. They just had horrible management. Speaking of horrible management, here's number 37, Hogan vs. Savage, WCW title, Halloween Havoc 96. You know, I'm going to say it again. Randy Savage was always better than Hulk Hogan and always will be better than Hulk Hogan. And I wish Savage was here instead. That's all I'm going to say. I wish that Savage had gotten a longer run with the championship. Now, I get why he didn't win it here. And it was a good match. But then it was undercut by the finish. Or not the finish, but the aftermath. Savage just would not quit. He would not quit. He would not quit. Like, you know, and then they were doing stuff with Hogan, having Miss Elizabeth and stuff like that. And it was all the personal stuff. And yeah, they were trying to, you know, drum up interest here and emotion and all that, even though people knew Savage and Liz were no longer together. But they, you know, had that connection, that stuff that people remember from years past. So they were playing into that. And Hogan and Savage, for the most part, always worked well together. And then, you know, Hogan would end up walking out with the championship, obviously, and then Roddy Piper would show up. The match was good, but again, almost overshadowed by the fucking aftermath of Piper coming out, and then they had to cut the promo off because Piper just kept going and going and going, and I love Piper. And it led to a match I'm going to talk about here in a couple minutes, but that match, it almost felt like an afterthought, and it's a real shame because Savage and Hogan did put in the work here, and they put in some good storytelling, even with the NWO. And the constant interference that was happening from the time the NWO was formed, Savage and Hogan still put on, you know, a pretty damn good match. Halloween Havoc 96, pretty damn good pay-per-view. And then we get to number 36, Flair versus Garvin, Steel Cage, NWA title match, Starrcade 87. Garvin's NWA title reign did not work. They were basically just doing it to pop, you know, a crowd for Starrcade 87. It should have been in Greensboro. They put it in Chicago. And then they had the Road Warriors not win the tag titles. That was a good idea. That was a real good idea, except it wasn't. Did not help at all. Crowd was pissed. And also, they could have drawn more money. If you listen to Cornette's podcast or even look at records, they could have drawn way more in Greensboro and would have actually done a whole lot better. Hell, they could have probably closed-circuited and made a hell of a lot more money. Not that Chicago isn't a great place, but they couldn't get into a bigger venue. They had to get into the venue they got in. And, yeah, it didn't end up working. But this, Flair and Garvin, really, really good. They could always work well together, but it felt deflating because nobody bought Garvin as a world champion, even though Garvin was more than talented enough to be a world champion. And Flair would win the title back and then would hold it for a while. A long time. A really long time, actually, now that I think about it. God damn. He would hold on to it, and then Steamboat would beat him at Chi-Town Rumble in '89. That was about 15 goddamn months because they actually treated title reigns seriously back then. And now they just toss it around like a prop. Thanks, Russo. This was good, though. Flair and Garvin, they always work well together. Crowd was definitely on Flair's side, though, and when Flair won, they popped. Number 35, DDP versus Bret. U.S. title, World War III, 1998. Yep, the iconic, in quotations, World War III 60-man Battle Royal match was not even the main event of the last World War III pay-per-view, because then it would be replaced with Mayhem in the name of the pay-per-view and Vince Russo's booking, that is, excuse me. At least for 99, not for 2000. Though they would have a straitjacket cage match I already talked about. This is good stuff, though. DDP and Bret always working well together. After DDP did not beat Goldberg in a very, 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 pretty much Goldberg's best pay-per-view match, I think, at Halloween Havoc 98. He would beat Bret for the U.S. Championship the next night after Bret and Sting had a match for the U.S. Championship. That's the best way I can describe it, because as much as I love Bret, it was not very good. DDP would end up still carrying the U.S. Championship here for a bit. At least DDP's ascent was working. It's just a shame that it came at the expense of Bret Hart, who just a year prior was the hottest free agent and had come into WCW, the hottest signee, and they fucked all that up. It was just fucking ridiculous. Now we get to number 34, the Horseman versus Zbyszko, Pillman, or the Horseman and Zbyszko versus Pillman, Sting, And the Steiners, War Games, Wrestle War 91. Okay, so I didn't actually need the cheat sheet there, except I totally do, actually, because it was Wyndham, Sid, and Flair, because Arn was injured, so they had Zbyszko go in there. Sorry for the cheat sheet. Sometimes it's hard to remember everything for the multi-man matches when you have a list this goddamn long. This is most notable for Pillman being dropped on his goddamn head. Sid just dropping him on his head because they had the War Games roof too low. Now, I get why they had it low, but I'm sorry, that's my one issue with the territory days. That was too fucking low. Like, you couldn't do anything. You could just punch each other, but if you tried anything like a press slam, you'd be, almost pushing the guy through like freaking raw hamburger. And it just wasn't very good. I don't understand why the fuck they did that. It was a really good War Games match, and it told the story of Pillman not wanting to give up, and he would not be denied. Sting got in there to Steiner. The people popping for the Steiner lines, fucking great. Fucking incredible. Really goddamn good shit. Here's the problem. If fucking killed it by having Elegante come out there, because after Pillman got dropped on his goddamn head, he's like checking out, oh, why'd you hurt my buddy? And Sid was probably horrified that he dropped Pillman. He's like, oh shit, I shouldn't have done that. The match was really good though. A really, really good War Games match. Pretty underappreciated. Not the best War Games match, because I got a couple here later on the list. But now, number 33, Piper vs. Hogan, Icon vs. Icon, Starrcade 96. I retro-reviewed this recently, so all I'm going to say is, boy, the crowd loved these guys, and they love what they did, and the match had its moments. And Piper winning was certainly shocking. Now, I'm not going to say the match was all that great, but as far as build, as far as how much they had the crowd eating out of the palm of their hand, they did some really, really good shit here. It just was a shame. The work was fucking dog shit. It really was. But the crowd energy and the crowd investment and what the guys tried to do by not doing that much, they really managed to, get the crowd just so amped up, and people were so shocked when Piper won, including me. It was like, holy shit, Piper won. But he didn't win the title because Hogan just couldn't give up the title. He just never could give it up. But anyway, I'm going to leave that right there. So agree, disagree with what I said. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Ritlin. I'll see you soon.